Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the fourth episode of the U.S. History GCast as presented by Gibsonian Institute. We are continuing on with the Cold War. Now we're looking at the Korean War. All right, so we've got some pretty good stuff today. You've seen the theme lately. I've been starting with either a political cartoon or a piece of propaganda. We've got some Chinese-Korean propaganda here. This quote is in Chinese. I'll translate it for you. It is, "Long live the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteer Army." And you can see that they're kind of united on this front in chasing back the United States soldiers and the people that they're fighting with here, right? Okay, so we're going to completely begin and end the Korean War today. This is one of my favorite topics to go through because the difference in North and South Korea is just so drastic. I find it to be really, really interesting. So we got a little bit of work to do, but I believe that it's a good variety, but also really interesting stuff that you're seeing. So we'll go through it. So let's get into the objectives. We of course got to examine why the United States enters the Korean War in the first place. Then we're going to kind of compare the beginning of the history of the Korean War. That's going to be the first exercise we do. Actually, that's going to be. And there's two textbooks, one's from North Korea, one's from South Korea. It's just a paragraph of each. And we're going to try to figure out, first of all, because the textbooks disagree as to who starts the Korean War. So we're going to try to figure out who starts the Korean War. And then also try to figure out which one do we think is North and which one is South. And then we'll go into the United States entrance into the Korean War, but then also we'll completely go from beginning of the Korean War all the way to the ceasefire. And then we have a documentary at the end on what North Korea is like today. No one really knows what North Korea is like. We get ideas, you can read books. I just read a book, A River into Darkness, about a man escaping North Korea. So that's one person's experience in North Korea. This documentary crew follows Dennis Rodman, Chicago Bulls player from the famed 90s dynasty, follows Dennis Rodman to North Korea. So it's a very entertaining documentary. But again, this documentary does a good job of saying this. They are shown a specific North Korea. They're not shown what normal life is in North Korea. But it's definitely a very interesting piece nonetheless. So let's get started. All right, so let's first begin with the who started the Korean War readings that we're going to be doing. So there's just 7 questions, but really 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 are actually two-parted. So it's really the same. It's part of the same question, but you're just going to read the passages posted on Google Classroom according to textbook A, who started the Korean War, according to textbook B, who started the Korean War. Obviously, they're going to disagree. Personally, I want to hear what you think is more reliable, and of course, you have to explain why is it reliable. Is it because of their use of statistics, because their writing doesn't sound as sensational or propaganda, but it sounds more analytical, or maybe just giving you information instead of trying to pump up one side or the other. All right, and then of course I give you the citations for both textbooks, and I want you to decide if textbook A corresponds to this one, which would be the South Korean textbook. So which text do you think is South Korean and which text do you think is North Korean? Explain why you think this for both of these. All right, it's pretty straightforward. It shouldn't take more than 10-15 minutes. So getting into these notes now with the Korean War, we got to first understand what's going on that's setting the kind of the scene for the United States to enter. So the context for the U.S. entrance. Beginning in 1949, Americans are going to lose a lot of confidence in containing communism for 3 reasons. The first one, the Soviets successfully detonated an atomic bomb in 1949. Ooh, we're not the only ones with the atomic bomb now. That changes a lot of people's opinions as to how the Cold War is playing out. Second, China falls to communism and Mao Zedong becomes a leader. I've been putting falls in quotation marks, you may notice, and it's not that I am saying that they didn't fall to communism, because that's the way it's always been phrased. However, I don't want you to think that they fell to communism as if this evil took them over. It's the communist side of this nation prove to be stronger than the other side of the nation, and that's what's going to happen in some of these cases where it's not they by some evil measure that communism comes into power. That's what the country chose, the majority of that country chose, or that was the stronger military side of the country. So that's what's going to commonly be the case. All right, so that's why I've been putting it in quotation marks. And the last one, North Korea invades South Korea. And all these things are happening, and we're going to get into it, but we see the domino theory kind of happening here, right? So you're going to start to see people in favor, even though we were just in World War II, that are saying, oh, it might be time to go. Let's kind of stop this before it gets even more out of hand. So looking at the invasion of South Korea, North Korea, the communist side. The South Korea side is the non-communist portion. Non-communist meaning that they're not exactly democratic completely, but they're not communists, which is good enough for the United States. Two reasons why North Korea is invaded. One, both North and South Korea want a united Korea, so this is an ultimate goal for both sides. It's just obviously one side wants control of the other. And then secondly, the United States announced a whole list of countries that are basically like, don't touch these countries in Asia. And South Korea, for some reason, I don't know, some historians have said maybe they did this on purpose and left South Korea off the list so that the United States would have a reason to get involved, or just some unexplained reason. So explaining why the United States gets involved. One, containment policy, right? We got to go wherever it starts to spread. This is it's spreading into a new nation, South Korea, so we're going to go there and stop it. The domino theory. One region falls to communism, many will follow, and this is starting to prove true with it spreading from the Soviet Union to China and now south to Korea, to North Korea. You'll understand when you see a map. Korea is south of China, not trying to confuse you there, directionally. And then the third reason is going to be the reputation of the United Nations. So we know that the United Nations replaces the League of Nations. The League of Nations was considered to be weak because it didn't do anything about stuff that were happening with World War II looming. So in order for the United Nations to actually mean something, they've got to step in and they got to say, no, this isn't going to fly. They actually have to do something. We might get a sneak appearance of my cat here, but bearing with us here. Moving on. So roles in Korea. This is the reason we talk about this, and this is known as a proxy war. It's the United States and the Soviets are going to both have a part to play in this. And they're obviously going to be on opposite sides, duking it out. All right, so we're not going to directly fight the Soviets, but they're going to side with the North Koreans, and we're going to side with the South Koreans. And by that proxy, we are going to end up fighting. So the United States is going to provide troops and supplies to the UN forces. And then the UN forces are going to be led by our very own World War II famed General Douglas MacArthur. The Soviet Union is going to provide air support for the North Korean effort as well as providing supplies to North Korea. So both sides are fairly involved. War breaks out. The yellow is going to be portion under control of North Korea. The green will be under control of South Korea in all these maps. I've used the same maps for the most part. So war breaks out, and South Korea they're about to lose. They're about to get crushed here. North Korea crosses the 38th parallel, which is that dotted line here, the pre-war boundary. That's kind of like that's going to be the status quo. When we get to 38th parallel, that's what normal used to be. So above that, below that is something different because of war. We're going to use that as kind of like our as a measuring stick of sorts. So Seoul, the South Korean capital, falls in 1 week, and it's pretty close to the parallel. So it's not surprising that it would fall so quickly, but they get all the way pushed back to Busan. The UN coalition forces arrive just in time. However, because the United States isn't the one completely fighting this, there's going to be French, there's going to be British, there's going to be all sorts of, I believe, up to 12 different nations are going to take place in forming the coalition of the United Nations. So we don't need a declaration of war. This is considered a policing action. We're not fighting to take over Korea. We're stopping North Korea from an aggressive action. That's the wording that allows this to happen without Senate approval, which sets a precedent. UN counterattack. So 1950 September. It's going to be led by General MacArthur. This arrow is pointing to Incheon. All right. So if you look, right here is Seoul. So the idea is, even though this is the only territory contained by South Korea, we're going to come in up here so that we can get closer to the capital and regain control of the capital as soon as possible. By the end of the month, 130,000 North Korean POWs taken. So the United Nations gets in and takes a considerable amount of land back quickly. 38th parallel. UN forces are going to reach the 38th parallel fairly soon after intervening, and then there's going to be a kind of a hot debate. Should they cross it? They've gotten things back to what they were before the war broke out. So this could be a good time to say, all right, we stopped communism from spreading. It's still in North Korea. We're right to where we were before. Let's just call it a day, and everyone's happy. The United Nations votes to unify all of Korea. Remember, this is a goal for both North and South Korea, so it's not surprising that they decided this, but also it's a way to even stamp out communism, much less just stop it from spreading. So it's a more aggressive action, but I mean, by this point, South Korea was almost wiped off the map, and here they are back to where they were before the war even began, almost back to where they need to be. So China is going to issue a warning. Please do not approach our border with Korea, which is the Yalu River. This blue part right up here, that's the Yalu River. We're going to talk about that a couple times. So, of course, you know what's going to happen. We're going to get close to the Yalu River. MacArthur continues towards the Yalu River. You see, we've got all this territory. We've almost taken over all of North Korea at this point. Just steamrolling the North Koreans. China's going to say one more time, do not get close to the Yalu River. So this is going to prompt a visit from President Truman at the time to General MacArthur at Wake Island. Wake Island's going to be in nearby around Japan, right? Japan's already southeast of it, excuse me. All right. So, and this is interesting. It's seen as a power move that MacArthur says, I can't come visit you in the United States. You got to come see me. And it's kind of like he's on his turf. So it's almost he's surrounded by military people that really love MacArthur, whereas Truman's kind of going into an area that he's not used to being in. So this is a highly publicized meeting here. The meeting at Wake Island. Truman's going to come tell MacArthur, take care, be cautious around the Yalu River. We don't want China getting involved in this war. It's not that we're afraid of China. It's just that China at this point in history is already a massive nation, and they can just throw a ton of people into this conflict, and that's going to throw away everything that we just worked for. So he's saying, good job so far. Be cautious. Don't get the Chinese involved. And he doesn't want to expand the war, and he doesn't want to go into China and have to fight the Chinese. So just hang tight there, Tiger. MacArthur says, all right, we can do that. He doesn't do that. MacArthur gets too close to the Yalu River in October 1959, and North Korea pushes us all the way, the UN forces, all the way back past the South Korean capital of Seoul. All right, 300,000 Chinese soldiers come across the border and help them out. And here we are, right back to about where we were at the halfway point. So there's just been this there's been this battle back and forth of Korea being almost completely South Korean and almost being North Korean, to back and forth. And this one is seen to have been maybe avoidable. So the UN is pushed south of the 30th parallel. MacArthur's response, let's just nuke them. We've got nukes. They don't. What are they going to do about it? He also is pointing out that if we nuke China, we can maybe even make China to overthrow their communist government. So a military leader's idea here, we've got weapons, we got to use them. All right. There's no point in having these weapons if we're not going to use them. We can stop this problem with North Korea and China. All we got to do is just start using bombs. And Truman not going to want to do this. All right. The way this is going to conclude, the UN forces are able to push back up to the 38th parallel by March of 1951. MacArthur is still throwing a fit. He wants to start using these bombs, and he thinks that if we do this, we can easily win the war. But MacArthur has seen that back home, Dwight Eisenhower, general during the supreme commander of World War II, gets elected president. Says, I like that. he can be president. Maybe I can be president. So he's going to be seen as getting into the public opinion more often. And he's going to try to get the press on his side by saying, look at what I like. If we use what we've got, our materials that we have at our disposal, we're fighting with our arms behind our back. Essentially, we can easily win this. It's a matter of if Truman wants to win or not. Truman does not appreciate this, cans MacArthur, and puts General Ridgway in control. From this point, it's going to last until it's going to be a ceasefire until President Eisenhower eventually gets a ceasefire agreed to, and that'll be the end of the Korean War. All right, so there's a lot of tensions. We kind of just sped right through that, but that's really like the story of the Korean War with the U.S. involvement. July 1953 is when we will pull out of Korea. That DMZ zone, demilitarized zone, is going to be still here today. This is what it looks like. These 3 blue houses. All right, it's a very, very interesting part of the world because technically North and South Korea still at war. They've never a ceasefire is not peace, right? It just means we're not going to shoot at each other. All right. There has been no treaty signed. There's been no complete peace agreed. So technically, North Korea still thinks that we're still considers the United States at war with them as well. So that's why it is in fact the most heavily guarded border in the world, 151 miles long, completely guarded, and it's not going to be guarded like a guy at each, like they're not arm length apart guarding this border, but there's a lot of soldiers gathered around this border. All right. One thing I want to point out before moving on here, you see the South Koreans are right here. This is the South Korean side, also viewed from here. This is looking into the North Korean side. It looks very kind of dystopian right over here. Whereas the North Koreans view looking into South Korea, it looks a little bit, look at this building right here, right? That looks way more advanced technologically than the other side, right? It's just really shows the drastic differences. But then also, I really like this to point out this in the North Korean part. The North Korean soldiers have eyes on each other. He's watching him and he's watching him. These guys are watching each other because they don't want them to defect or to run across the border and join the South Koreans. So they're policing the border. They're also policing each other. It's a really, really interesting way of looking at this, where you got the South Koreans, they're just looking over at the North Koreans. North Koreans looking at each other. So I think it does a great job just in this one photo of showing the tensions between the two sides, but also within one side. That the documentary is going to do a fantastic job of talking about. All right, so this wraps up the notes here. I've got a really brief assessment. I don't want to overwork you here because I really want you to enjoy this documentary. So the documentary is from Vice. It's on HBO, but I've got a YouTube link that you're going to watch it on. It's only it's just under 30 minutes. So what all you're going to do is just watch that the documentary, and then what part of the documentary did you really enjoy the most or find the most interesting? My personal favorite is when they visit the university, and they go into like a computer lab and they find the guy that's just staring at the Google search page the entire time that they are in there. So clearly the man doesn't know that he's never worked a computer. He's just staring at Google, and he does for 15 minutes. To me, I think that does a great job of just showing it's a different place. It's almost a different world, right? So I really think you're going to enjoy this documentary. Yes, I'm attacking it on, and it's a little bit more work than usual, but I really think that you're going to enjoy this. I wouldn't assign it if I didn't feel so passionately that you really should watch it. So go ahead, enjoy it. It's got Dennis Rodman in it. It's got the Harlem Globetrotters in it. It's bizarre. Just to put it as blunt as I can. I think you're going to get a kick out of it. So write about just a paragraph. What's your favorite part of the documentary? I don't know. We're on to the weekend, so good stuff. If you got any questions, come see me at office hours. Email me. Other than that, enjoy the documentary and take care.